Ever get that feeling?
Yeah.
Yeah, that project you just keep pushing off. Well, today we're doing a deep dive into why we procrastinate.
Oh, yeah.
We're looking at some really interesting stuff from the Mindset Mechanics podcast.
Okay, cool.
Get ready to rethink why you put things off.
I think what's so cool about how they look at this is they reframe procrastination.
Yep.
They say it's not just laziness,
Uh-huh.
it's this battle between you now and you in the future.
Right.
It's like a tug of war in your head.
They actually had this great example.
Okay.
Imagine you have a big deadline coming up,
Yeah.
but instead of working, you're suddenly watching like a whole season of your favorite show.
Oh, yeah. Been there for sure.
I know we've all been there,
Totally.
but they say it's not always because we just don't care.
Right.
It's not about lacking ambition.
Exactly.
It's because right now in this moment, we just want to avoid discomfort.
Yeah, and even if it means our future selves are going to have to deal with the consequences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's get into this discomfort thing a bit more.
Yeah.
Why do we even procrastinate in the first place?
Well, Mindset Mechanics actually identifies 3 main reasons, and the first one is kind of interesting.
Right.
It's perfectionism.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, you might be putting off like finishing that presentation
Uh-huh.
because you're just terrified it's not going to be good enough for your boss.
Right.
You're scared it won't be perfect.
Yeah, you just get stuck.
Totally. And
Yeah.
then there's task aversion.
Okay.
This is when the actual task itself just feels terrible.
Ugh.
Like maybe it's so boring or way too complicated or it just feels completely overwhelming.
Yeah, you just don't even want to think about it.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's a lack of structure.
Right.
Without clear deadlines or a plan, it's just so easy to push things off.
Totally. And that's where Mindset Mechanics gets really interesting.
Okay, what do they say?
They say procrastination isn't just about avoiding those tasks.
Uh-huh.
It's about avoiding the emotions that are tied to the tasks.
You mean like even just replying to an email can feel emotionally charged?
Exactly. It's like we're trying to avoid these negative feelings.
Yeah, even though we know we might have to deal with bigger problems later.
Exactly. So it makes you wonder
But,
if we can understand why we procrastinate,
yeah,
can we actually find ways to overcome it?
good question.
Well, the good news is Mindset Mechanics gives us 5 science-backed strategies to help us beat procrastination.
I like it. Okay, tell me more.
The first one is called the 2-minute rule.
Okay,
It's all about building momentum.
I like that.
So if something takes less than 2 minutes to start, just do it now.
Oh, that's interesting.
They use the example of writing a report.
Yeah.
Instead of putting off the whole thing, you could just write the title in the first sentence.
Oh, so you trick your brain into getting started.
Right. It's like a tiny action can have a ripple effect.
Yeah, sometimes the hardest part is just starting.
Exactly. And once you start, it's way easier to keep going.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so the next strategy is all about breaking down those huge tasks into smaller pieces.
Okay, I like that.
Mindset Mechanics calls this chunking.
Chunking, okay.
So think about a big project you've been avoiding, like cleaning out the garage.
Oh, yeah, that sounds familiar.
Mindset Mechanics says break those monster tasks down into smaller bites.
Right, like how do you eat an elephant?
Exactly, one bite at a time.
I love that.
And when you're tackling those smaller chunks,
Yeah.
there's this thing called the Pomodoro technique.
Okay, I've heard of that.
This can be really helpful.
How does that work again?
Okay, so we have these 5 amazing strategies to fight procrastination.
Right.
The 2-minute rule, breaking down tasks, the Pomodoro technique, rewarding ourselves and making our environment work for us.
Yeah.
But now comes the hard part,
What's that?
figuring out which of these will work for us.
Yeah, it's true.
It's one thing to know about them,
Right.
but it's harder to actually use them in our lives.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting.
Yep.
Remember how Mindset Mechanics said we're often avoiding feelings more than tasks?
Right? They said even small tasks can feel really emotionally charged.
Yeah.
Like we're trying to dodge a landmine.
Exactly.
But doesn't everyone feel anxious or overwhelmed sometimes?
Sure.
Why do some people let it stop them while others just get things done?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it shows us how important it is to understand our own triggers.
Okay.
Like, for example, if you're always putting off answering emails,
Uh,
maybe it's not just that you hate doing it.
what else could it be?
What if deep down you're actually scared of conflict or criticism?
So it's not the emails themselves.
Right.
It's the anxiety they cause.
Exactly. In that case, just changing your workspace might not be enough.
So what should you do?
You might need to deal with that fear,
How do you do that?
maybe by practicing how to be assertive or changing how you see feedback.
So we need to be like emotional detectives.
I like that.
We have to figure out what's really causing us to procrastinate.
Exactly. Once you know what the emotional problem is, you can choose the strategies that will actually help.
Okay, so let's try a real-life example.
Okay.
Imagine someone's been putting off starting a big creative project,
Okay.
like writing a book or launching a business.
Yeah.
Where do they even begin with something like that?
Well, first they need to ask themselves, what feeling am I really trying to avoid here?
Okay.
Is it fear of failing?
Right.
Are they overwhelmed by how big the project is?
Yeah.
Or maybe they just don't believe in themselves enough.
And once they figure out the emotional root of the problem,
Yeah,
they can start making a plan.
exactly. Let's say they're scared of failing.
Okay.
The 2-minute rule could be a great place to start.
How so?
They could just write for 2 minutes every day.
Okay.
Just focus on getting words down without worrying if they're good enough.
That makes sense.
Starting is often the hardest part.
Yeah, for sure.
And as they get going, they can slowly increase their writing time.
Okay.
Maybe using the Pomodoro technique to add some structure.
And to deal with feeling overwhelmed by a huge project, they could break it down into smaller pieces.
Right? Like with writing a novel.
Yeah.
Instead of thinking about the whole book, just focus on brainstorming characters.
Okay.
Maybe next week you work on outlining the first chapter.
Yeah, these little wins can help you build momentum and not get overwhelmed.
Exactly. And don't forget about rewards.
Right.
They could celebrate every time they hit a milestone.
Okay.
Like finishing a chapter, hitting a certain word count, or even just showing up to write consistently.
Our brains do love rewards.
They do, and they can really push us to do more.
This all sounds really helpful.
Yeah.
But what about those times when we just can't find any motivation?
Oh, I know what you mean.
Like when even thinking about starting makes you tired.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. And it brings up an important mindset shift that mindset mechanics talked about.
Yeah.
Remember they said you don't have to feel motivated to actually do something?
Right. It was like they were giving us permission to stop waiting for inspiration.
Exactly.
But how does that actually work?
Yeah. Well, research shows that we often take action before we feel motivated.
Really?
Yeah, it's like a snowball.
Okay.
Once you start rolling, it picks up speed.
I see.
So even if you don't feel like it taking that first step, even a small one can actually make you feel motivated.
So we don't wait for inspiration. We
Right.
make our own inspiration by doing something.
Exactly. It's about changing from passively waiting to actively doing.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
But I bet it's still easy to fall back into our old habits.
it can be.
What are some tips for staying consistent and making these strategies into habits? So we've learned all these great strategies for tackling procrastination, but how do we actually make them stick?
You're right. It's one thing to understand it all,
Yeah,
but actually changing how we behave is a whole other challenge.
sure.
It's about making these strategies into habits we can keep up.
Okay.
And the key is to start small and build from there.
Okay.
Don't try to change your whole life at once.
Right.
Focus on small changes that will eventually lead to big results.
So instead of climbing the whole mountain at once,
Exactly.
we should set up base camp first.
I like that analogy.
Thanks.
Remember the 2-minute rule.
Yeah.
It's a great way to start building a habit.
Okay.
Start by using it in one area of your life where you usually procrastinate.
Like what?
Maybe it's answering emails or doing the dishes or finally doing that paperwork you've been putting off.
Okay, so pick one small battle and win it.
Right, and then move on to the next one.
That feels a lot easier than trying to change everything at once.
It is, and as you start seeing the benefits of that one small change,
Uh-huh.
it creates this positive feedback loop that makes you want to keep going.
Like you're building momentum.
Exactly one small win at a time.
I like that.
And don't forget to keep track of your progress.
Okay, how do we do that?
You can use a checklist or a habit tracker app, or even just write it down in a journal.
Okay.
When you can actually see your progress,
Yeah.
it can really keep you motivated.
It's like a reminder of how far you've come.
Exactly, especially on those days when it feels like you haven't done much.
Sometimes we need that.
Absolutely. And here's another important tip.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to experiment and find what works best for you.
Right.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Is true?
Maybe the Pomodoro technique feels too strict for you.
Yeah.
But you find that breaking down tasks into smaller pieces makes a huge difference.
So it's about figuring out what works for you.
Exactly. You're like your own productivity detective.
I like that.
You try different things and find what helps you do your best work.
Awesome. And it's important to remember that we're going to have setbacks along the way.
Right. We're not perfect.
We shouldn't beat ourselves up if we have a bad day
Yeah.
or slip back into old habits.
Exactly. It happens to everyone.
It does.
Instead of seeing those setbacks as failures,
Yeah.
See them as chances to learn and make adjustments.
I like that.
Ask yourself, what caused this to happen?
Okay.
And what can I do differently next time?
So it's more about making progress than being perfect.
Right. It's a journey, not a race.
Exactly.
This isn't about being perfectly productive all the time.
Right.
It's about finding a way to manage your time well and reach your goals without burning yourself out.
That makes sense.
Right.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into procrastination, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
Procrastination isn't a personality flaw.
Right.
It's a habit. And like any habit, it can be changed.
Yeah.
By understanding the science behind it, using the right strategies, and having a growth mindset, anyone can overcome procrastination.
I love that. So the next time you find yourself putting something off, remember,
Right.
it's not about willpower, it's about strategy.
That's so true.
Choose one technique we talked about and try it.
Okay.
You might be surprised how much you can get done and how good it feels to finally do it.
It's about taking control of your time and your goals.
That's a great way to put it. And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed exploring procrastination with us and that you now have the tools to tackle your own procrastination challenges.
I think they do.
Until next time, happy diving.